From Fox News, it's The Campaign with Bret.
On Sunday night, President Trump signed both the $900 billion COVID-19 relief bill along with the government funding bill, avoiding a government shutdown. The president signed the bills after advocating for a $2,000 stimulus check for Americans and challenging the omnibus spending bill, which he asserted contained too much pork and unnecessary spending. We'll start there with our panel, Washington Post columnist and AEI resident fellow Marc Thiessen, Democratic strategist and syndicated talk radio host Leslie Marshall, and co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics, Tom Bevan. Marc, it seemed like by signing these bills, this one bill, it's put together basically, the president ended this drama of his own creation, even though Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin was in on the conversation and the negotiations for weeks. It came down to really the end here for a solution, a signature.
Yeah, I mean, it's utter insanity. The first of all, keep in mind, the Democrats have been blocking COVID relief since July. And despite repeated Republican offers to do $1 trillion stimulus, they finally passed the COVID relief just as the economic support programs are about to expire. But instead of taking credit, he threatens to veto the bill. And that was passed with Republican votes and negotiated by his own Treasury Secretary. That left millions of Americans spending Christmas wondering if they were going to be left to fend for themselves during this worst period of the pandemic, when all the economic support disappears. And people will not soon forget that. And it left Senators Perdue and Loeffler, who are fighting for not just for their own Senate seats, but to keep the Senate in Republican hands, stuck with this. They couldn't take credit for the emergency relief because the president was holding on to it for 5 days when they're 2 weeks out from an election, and potentially in the position of having to override his veto and anger his base just as they go to the polls. And then he handed Pelosi and Schumer a cudgel to use against Republicans because they're not going to pass $2,000 stimulus checks. So they can beat them up and use Trump to do it. And it makes him look like a lame duck. So it's just a disaster all around.
Yeah, there really wasn't many people that looked at it and said, there's a plus to it. What did he get out of it, Leslie? Obviously, the bill process is heinous in Washington, especially when they throw everything together at the end. And there is a lot of pork in there that lobbyists managed to get into Christmas tree ornaments on a bill like that. But as far as like foreign aid, that stuff is submitted by the State Department early in the process. And it seemed like it was a end around to start arguing about the aid to Pakistan when the bill is on your desk after weeks of negotiation.
No, I would agree with you there. I mean, it's a cold day in where when Marc and I agree on something, and we are agreeing today. Look, I get angry when my party, Democrats, and when Speaker Pelosi, add any kind of pork, or Republicans do as well, especially when you're talking about people who are really having a very difficult time among this pandemic without their benefits, not knowing whether or not they're going to, as you rightly mentioned, both Bret and Marc, how are they going to feed their family? How are they going to pay for their rent or their mortgage? Here's the problem. There are a lot of problems with this. One, it's not enough. The 600 is not enough. Two, the president looks to be in lockstep, if you will, with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer when he's talking about 2,000, which, Democrats are going to continue from my party pushing for. And in addition to that, Bret, this is not the art of the deal. This is the art of how not to do a deal. Because if you're going to sign something that you have poo-pooed for so long, he should have signed it earlier, because what Americans look at is an outgoing president who cared more about playing golf and fighting the election than fighting for them. He could have signed this earlier. People could have had, prior to the holidays, at least some relief, knowing some relief, $600 was on the way.
Marc, do you think this hurts Perdue and Loeffler in Georgia?
I certainly think it does, because for one, they lost, so we're 2 weeks out from this very high stakes Senate runoff. And for the last week, they haven't been really able to campaign saying that they worked with President Trump to pass this emergency COVID relief. They haven't been able to take credit for it, and they were put in a position where they would have to, might have to vote to override his veto. And then they got the same problem with the National Defense Authorization, where you've got for 59 years, the defense authorization has been signed into law until now. And it was passed with Republican votes. Georgia is a state with a lot of military bases. It's a 3% pay raise for American servicemen and women, and $740 billion in military spending. And the president vetoed it. And so now they're stuck in a position of having to either flip-flop, having voted for it, and vote against it, and vote against the military pay raise, or vote to override the president's veto and anger his supporters in the state who don't like any defiance of the president. So all of this chaos, this is why he lost the election, Bret, honestly. I mean, millions of Americans who like his policies don't like this chaos, we're tired of this chaos, and they decided to not vote for him. And all of this just validates their choice. It's destructive to the party, it's destructive to him, and it's destructive to the country.
I mean, that's interesting. I've heard some Republicans say that, and I think it does carry some weight, Leslie, in that there is a tiredness of, being pushed to the brink every time. That said, Washington is not the smoothest as far as it operates, and eventually somebody has to pay for something. I know we're in the middle of an emergency and a COVID emergency, but eventually, $27 trillion is going to catch up to us. Not that Democrats or Republicans care about the deficit or debt in recent weeks and months, but eventually they have to.
Yes, they have to. But you know what? The voters don't care about that right now, Bret. And I'm going to disagree with Marc with Georgia. I'm a pessimist by nature. And I have to say, it's just going to come down to people. Can the Democrats get more voters out, or can the Republicans get more voters out? For some people, it's, a race between a man and a woman on one side. For other people, it's a race between the old and the new, the old Georgia and the new Georgia after Joe Biden won Georgia and flipped that red state blue. For some, it is going to be a race between a white and an African-American. But I think there are a lot of people that are just going to show up regardless of their disappointment with these, two Republican senators in their state. With the president and the rhetoric. I think it just comes down to, do they believe it's all fraudulent and just stay home, or do they come out and vote because they want their party to win? And I really think it just comes down to that. They either want the left, the Democrat, and Georgia to be completely blue and Mitch McConnell not to lead the Senate, or completely the opposite. And I think that's what it comes down to. So I really don't think that, even though, yes, the chaos was one of the reasons that Donald Trump will be a one-term president, this is, I don't think, going to affect these races, because I think people have blinders on and they're really just looking at all of those issues I just mentioned.
Tom, what about Georgia? We were talking about how, Trump's decisions about this bill and the signing late and all of the chaos possibly affects Georgia, but he is also going down there to campaign in two spaces where early voting for Republicans is a little diminished, in Dalton, Georgia, and Valdosta, Georgia, two places where Republicans were hoping for bigger numbers so far, and they haven't gotten them. The president's going down to campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Leslie. I don't know that what's going on with the relief bill is going to have any sort of material impact. A lot of people have already voted. And I do think the mixed messaging is potentially an issue. And the president's going to go down there. He's going to rally the troops, and you know what he's going to say, because we know Donald Trump. He's going to promote David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, and he's going to say, "Look, you got to go vote." And he'll do that half the time, and the other half of his rally, he's going to spend railing against this election and railing against the results in Georgia and railing against Brian Kemp and the Secretary of State, and saying the vote was fraudulent and stolen, and close by saying, and oh, by the way, go to the polls tomorrow and vote for these Republicans because it matters. And that is, I mean, look, if it's 50,000 people who don't turn out, or 10,000 people even, I mean, it could make a difference. If Republican voters say, you know what, the president's right, this was stolen on November 3rd, it's fraudulent, my vote's not going to count, the same thing's going to happen, so I'm just not going to bother this time. It could make a difference, because according to all the polling, and take it for what it's worth, these races look to be very, very tight. And I mean, we know Georgia's tight because it was just tight on November 3rd. I mean, how many millions of votes cast came down to just over 10,000 votes difference? I mean, I think it is going to be really, really close. So any and all of these these little things are going to, I think, could materially affect the outcome on the margins.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.